And welcome into the Fighting Saints Report here on Monday, the 11th, Veterans Day, as we honor those who have served this country. And Jack Milewski, Jim Leitner with you, breaking down a tough weekend for the Fighting Saints overall. First time this team has really faced adversity. They fell into the loss column in regulation for the first two times this season. A playoff-like game on Friday against Waterloo, and then a game in which they just couldn't find any offense on Saturday against the Fargo Force. And so, as always, we'll get into breaking down both of those games. But first and foremost, breaking down the weekend as a whole. When you look at it, this will be an interesting week of practice leading up to these next games to see how the Fighting Saints respond, because when we touched on it on the broadcast on Saturday, it was how are they going to respond from their first regulation loss. Now it's how will they respond from their first two regulation losses, knowing that, yeah, it's a tough feeling, but you're still 8-2-1 after the first essentially month of the season. So it'll be pretty interesting to see what the mood is and what they're able to do in this week of practice leading up to the games.
Yeah, I look at this weekend and, you look at the Waterloo game, there was times when Dubuque was just dominant. And you look at that and you think, well, you probably should have won that game. Then you look at Saturday night against Fargo, outshoot them almost 2-1. Well, you probably should have won that game too, but you didn't. And that's kind of the way hockey can go sometimes. You can outplay your opponent and, you just can't find a way to win. And I think what really was the nice thing about this team through the preseason and the first 10 games or so was they always found a way to win. And, that's not always going to happen. So I think this weekend was a good... it can be a good thing for them to realize that even if you play your best hockey, you might not win. So maybe you get a little bit more sense of urgency in practice this week, or maybe you get a little more sense of urgency in the next game you play. But I think in just talking to some of the players, they were not real happy about losing these two games. And I think it's going to be great motivation for them to move forward. And, everybody loses games. Everybody has... losing streaks. You just want to minimize them as best you can. And, so I think in a lot of ways, I think this weekend could be good for them.
Yeah, and the Fighting Saints, we'll dive into Friday's game because that was not just, I think, the best played hockey game this season, just in terms of both teams playing for almost a complete 60 minutes. It's one of the best hockey games I can remember from, if we were including last year as well, that the Fighting Saints were involved in. I mean, that was just crisp, clean hockey. We noted it because of the lack of play stoppages. The talent level was at an all-time high on those two teams. The goaltending was phenomenal. The defense, the special teams, everything about it for a full 60 minutes was just a great hockey game. And then you had the drama of a penalty shot. It went against the Fighting Saints, but it's still right down to the wire, excitement to the bitter end, and then the goalie pulled and the Fighting Saints pressing. I mean, I thought it was one of the most entertaining USHL games that I've watched in the year and now a couple months that I've been in the league.
I would definitely agree. And I actually... To me, I actually like it more than I like a playoff game. Playoff hockey is, I love the intensity. I love how it gets ramped up. But sometimes it just gets too clogged up, or it's too defensive, or it's just too, both teams are just trying to measure each other out, and it's gets too clogged up, or it's too defensive. This game was wide open both ways. I mean, granted, you did see really good defensive plays. You saw a lot of skill both ways, a lot of creativity, and it's just entertaining back and forth. Whereas, you know what I mean about the playoff style games.
I mean, it was 33-32 to shots, I think, in the Fighting Saints' favor. So, yeah, it wasn't for lack of chances that there was a 3-2 score.
Yeah, and I just like, there was creativity on both sides, good quality goaltending because there were good scoring chances. And just like I said, probably one of the most entertaining games that I've seen in a long time, too. Better than a playoff game. I mean, and I know a lot of people think playoff hockey is the best. Sometimes I don't think playoff hockey is the best as far as, watchable and enjoying the game. But that was right up there with one of the best ones I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, entertainment value through the roof, and for me, just again the quality of hockey. I mean, there have been some entertaining games that are sloppy. There are 6-5 games where everything's going in, and it's entertaining because the goals are high. But the quality of hockey from every line on every shift, it just never dipped. It was just a great game to watch. And then Saturday night, it wasn't a bad hockey game from the Fighting Saints, but I don't think there was even a comparison in terms of the way the team played on Friday versus Saturday. And oftentimes that happens after a big game, after you have to raise your level to against arguably the best team in the USHL right now. I think Saturday, the Fighting Saints, though they outshot, at least from my perspective, Fargo, of the 30 shots, I think maybe 5 or 6 were legitimately good chances. I think Brady didn't have a ton of traffic in front of him. You have to give him credit for making the stops, but it wasn't like he was tested a ton for 30 shots. It just seemed like a little bit of a lull after a really high-intensity game on Friday.
Yeah, and I give Brady a lot of credit in Fargo's net, and I give the guys in front of him a lot of credit too. You mentioned the 30 shots, and that's a pretty decent total of shots. But I thought Fargo's defense did a real nice job of, playing almost like in basketball terms, like man-to-man defense, where they didn't allow the Fighting Saints a lot of room to breathe in the attacking zone, and they did a nice job clearing out the front. There were I can't think of any second chance scoring opportunities for Dubuque. Maybe 1 or 2 or possibly 3, but there was never any egregious rebounds or anything that any of those kind of opportunities that Dubuque could have scored on. So credit to Fargo's defense. And, we mentioned it on the air Saturday night. They're not a real offensive team, so they really have to play good, solid defense. And I thought they did, and they looked really good all night long defensively.
And both games for the Fighting Saints, it's a late goal, very different circumstances, but that's something we saw a lot last season. And last season, it was more of a product of the Fighting Saints playing sloppily towards the end of games. This weekend, it didn't feel the way it didn't feel like they were just taking undisciplined penalties. The penalty shot was questionable. We thought the puck was pushed first, but in that situation, it's tough to even give up that breakaway to begin with. And then on Saturday, just a case of Fargo getting a good chance in the last minute. But regardless of how it happens, it's certainly something you don't want to see too much, because giving up those late goals in any period, especially the third period, though, can really be backbreaking. In the third period, it can lose you games. In the first and second period, it can really switch the momentum to whichever team scores that late goal.
Yeah, and both of those goals, basically, they were created odd man rushes because, just a little misstep in the Fighting Saints attacking zone. In both cases, defensemen just got feet tangled just a touch, and it led to an odd man rush the other way. The penalty shot, you have to chase the guy as a breakaway. You got to chase him down and knock the puck away. And, I agree with you. I thought that was a good defensive play, and they got the puck more than they got the puck carrier. I thought it was a good defensive play, but the officials on the ice didn't see it that way. And then Saturday night against Fargo, a similar situation, just a misstep in Dubuque's zone led to a 2-on-1, and that's a tough situation to put your goaltender in. And but again, it really emphasizes that you have to play a full 60 minutes and you have to play good, clean hockey, especially in those tight hockey games like we saw this weekend. And, it's a good learning experience. You go back to it and, you look at the standings, and although Dubuque's in second place in the Eastern Conference, they still have the best winning percentage overall in the USHL. So there's really nothing to hang your head about. And, I think it's good to have a little burr in your saddle for this week in practice, but it's nothing to be upset about. And, the players I talked to afterwards said, hey, our season's not over right now. We still got 8 months left to go if we go all the way, and that's a good attitude to take. But sometimes it's nice to get a little ticked off about the results you had over the weekend, and makes you work just a touch bit harder in practice the next week.
And again, when we closed off the broadcast by saying, if you had told the Fighting Saints 11 games into the season, would you be happy with 8-2-1? you wouldn't have found anyone, I don't think, that would have said they would have been unhappy with 8-2-1. I mean, if you're being realistic before a season, it's just about as good of a mark as you could hope to start with. The one thing I wanted to ask you before we take our first break is, I know it's early on in the season, but this weekend and last weekend, the Cedar Rapids game was the only one of the last three where we really saw a great goal total from the Fighting Saints. The offenses came to play against Waterloo, but the goaltending and defenses were good in front of them. Do you think there's any reason to be concerned about the Fighting Saints offense maybe not producing as much as we saw in the preseason, or do you think that's just a product of working out some kinks early on in the season, or getting used to teams playing more defense as it usually happens during the regular season?
Yeah, I go back and I look at that Waterloo game, and I think they could have had 5 or 6 goals easily. Mm-hmm. They had that many good quality grade A scoring chances, and they got robbed on a couple of occasions, and a couple good defensive plays, a couple times where they just misfired on a good open net. So I think I'd be a lot more concerned if they weren't generating opportunities. Mm-hmm. Saturday night, they probably could have generated a little bit more in terms of chances. But again, Fargo played a real good lockdown style. To have the kind of performance they had against Waterloo. And Waterloo, through the first 10 games of the season, in my opinion, was the best defensive team. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they had the lowest goals allowed. But to generate those kind of opportunities, I think that's a really good sign. Mm-hmm. And, I think a lot of times we get kind of wrapped up in the analytics, or we say, geez, we're not scoring enough goals. But you have to look at the fundamentals. You have to look at how the game is being played. Mm-hmm. And I thought they generated a lot of chances on Friday night. Saturday night, again, you mentioned it earlier, I think there might have been a little bit of an emotional letdown after losing such a tough game Friday night. But in terms of concern, I would say no. I think we're going to see this team score a lot of goals and a lot of key goals this season.
I would agree with that. I think the only thing that I've seen that, and it's not really a concern, but just the last 2 weekends, it's been a good offensive performance. And again, even with the 2 goals in Waterloo, like you alluded to, they generated so much. A good offensive performance and then an inconsistent offensive performance. Omaha was inconsistent last weekend. Fargo was inconsistent this weekend. There were chances, but by and large, for a full 60, it wasn't a great offensive performance. But then Cedar Rapids, Dubuque, again, probably could have had a couple more goals in that game. And Waterloo, they could have had a couple more goals as well.
Yeah, and I think if there's one thing that I'd like to see a little bit of an uptick in is maybe the secondary scoring. I think the Saints have relied on the same 2 lines pretty much for most of the first 10 games of the season. And that happens, especially when you have a big roster turnover and you have a lot of new guys in your lineup. Sometimes it takes a little while, for that scoring or for guys to feel confident and get that monkey off the back and start scoring goals. Tommy Middleton had a big goal this weekend. Mm-hmm. Hopefully that's something that kind of jumpstarts him. I thought it did. I thought after he scored that goal, it seemed like he had a little more jump in his step the rest of the game. So I think, we get a few more guys like that who get that first goal out of the way. Then I think you're going to see a lot more confidence, and you're going to see a lot higher scores.
Yeah, and Jimmy Glynn got his first in the USHL the weekend before. So there is that secondary scoring starting to come around. We'll take our first break, and when we come back, we're looking at what happened overall in the USHL. A lot of one-win weekends for teams. There was a good amount of parity this weekend, and I think that just speaks to teams starting to find their flow and how tight the USHL should be the rest of the season. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Milewski, Jim Leitner. A little bit of snow on the ground, not expecting that here in November. Roads weren't too bad today, but worse than you would want in mid-November, exactly. I think. Hoping that the warmer weather starts to come around, and I think it's going to. But I guess the snow is just reminding us that we are certainly right in the middle of hockey season, and the USHL in full swing right now. Every team has played at least 10 games now. The bottom of the league with Dubuque, Fargo, and Sioux Falls have all played 11, and the top of the league is with Green Bay and Tri-City playing 15. So we're starting to even things out a little bit. And speaking of even, that's exactly what this weekend was. Chicago, the only team to play in a series and win 2 games. Cedar Rapids played 2 different opponents and won both games. So only CR and Chicago, 2 Eastern Conference foes for the Fighting Saints, winning both games over the weekend. Every other team that played 2 games won 1 and lost 1. And overall, I think that shows that a lot of these teams are figuring out their style of play, and so it's just going to be tough to win 2 games over a weekend the rest of the way in the USHL.
There's no doubt about that. And I mean, you look at Friday night, Green Bay goes into Muskegon and wins 5-1. Turn around the next night, Muskegon beats them 5-4 in overtime. You know, it just kind of shows you how, I say it all the time, how good a coaching you have and how good a talent you have in this league. You know, I remember, you know, when we were when Dubuque had lower levels of junior hockey, you know, you'd see so many 2-game series and so many sweeps and so many ugly sweeps. But, you know, a 5-1 victory for Green Bay on Friday night, that's a kind of a blowout by USHL terms. To come back the next night and have Muskegon win that one in overtime. It speaks to how good the talent level is in this league. And that's why you see this league so heavily scouted, and you see so many guys go on to Division I programs and see guys going on to the NHL out of this league, because it is like the NHL. It's like a mini NHL, just at a younger age group. And but again, there's such good coaching, such good adjustments being made. And you know, I even talking to Oliver David after the game Saturday night, he's like, you know, we're 8-0-1, and now, geez, I wonder what the scouting report is on us. What are people seeing in our scouting report, and you know, what are teams doing to scheme to beat us? And now you take the next step. How do you beat what they're doing to beat you? So
a never-ending chess match.
It's a never-ending chess match, but that makes coaches better. That makes players better. You know, when you go on to that next level, you know, you're gonna have to face adjustments. Teams are gonna get used to you. They're gonna have good video on you, so they know how to scheme against you. So I mean, that's it says a lot about this league and how talented it is from top to bottom, and how you can scheme and how you can prepare for the next one.
And we spoke earlier about what could have been perceived as a lull for the Fighting Saints on Saturday. Look at Waterloo. They lost 4-1 to Cedar Rapids on Saturday. I mean, even the team that won on Friday night, I would guess if you watched that game, it probably wasn't Waterloo's best effort. 4-1. Cedar Rapids is a good team, don't get me wrong, but again, that Friday night game was so fast-paced, so intense, that I think both of the teams might have experienced a lull on Saturday.
Yeah, and the thing about that is Waterloo hates Cedar Rapids way more than they hate Dubuque. So it's, you know, that's a game they always get up for. Waterloo and Cedar Rapids always get up for each other. So good for Cedar Rapids, though. I mean, they're a team that was kind of down towards the bottom of the conference. You know, entering this weekend, win 2 games, and geez, you shoot up into a tie or into 4th place. You know, go from second to the bottom to 4th place. That's a nice jump for Cedar Rapids, and something that we kind of expected. You know, we expected that team to be tough again this year, and but good for them. That's a big rivalry win, and you know, they scored 4 goals on Fargo, and we saw Saturday night how good Fargo was and how tough defensively Fargo was. So, but again, this is a crazy league, and just when Jack and I think we have everything figured out,
which is
rarely. Just when you think you have things figured out, it goes the other way, and I think that's best for the league. I mean, when you go to a hockey, I don't like going to a hockey game knowing what's going to happen.
Right.
You know, you like to go to a hockey game, you know, with a little bit of drama there and a little bit of uncertainty, and that makes it a lot more fun.
I think the biggest positive for Cedar Rapids, obviously the 2 wins, the biggest positive, but the next for them this weekend was the fact that they only allowed 3 total goals. They allowed 2 to Fargo, they allowed 1 to Waterloo. This was a team that the offense has never been a question this season, but the defense has really struggled. And this was the first weekend where they were able to put together back-to-back stellar defensive performances. So that's certainly something that I think will give them a lot of confidence moving forward. It doesn't seem like many teams will be able to play good defense against the Chicago Steel. Right now, they're a runaway train on offense. They lead the league with 63 goals total through 14 games. It's just an average of 4.5 per game. No big deal. They scored 12 this weekend, including 9 on Saturday. Chicago's got a ton of weapons, and I think when we did the power rankings, that was the biggest reason why we both had them in the top 3. You had them number 2, is because the offense is, I think top to bottom, that is the best offensive group in the league this season.
I would tend to agree, and it's crazy to me. And I looked at their roster at the beginning of the season, and the amount of talent they lost from last season. I kind of thought this would be more of a rebuilding year. Not necessarily that they'd be down towards the bottom of the standings, but I didn't expect them to be this good this early with so many new faces in the lineup. Granted, they do have a couple guys like Gunnar Wolf-Fontaine back, who are experienced USHL guys. Matteo De Cefal, he's another one, an experienced USHL forward, and so I expected them to be good. I didn't expect them to be this good this early and scoring this many goals. And it kind of just goes to show you that they got things going on in Chicago, and they've got a good system in place, and they're finding ways to win consistently on a year-to-year basis. They've been, for my money, they've been the best team in the Eastern Conference over the course of the last 3-4 years. They've been the best overall team in that span. So good for them. And the nice thing is Dubuque only plays them 4 times this year instead of 6 or 8. So that'll be an interesting to see. I don't even know when Dubuque plays. It's
not
long
until I think March or February.
Yeah, it's a long time away before Dubuque plays them. So it'll be fun to see that matchup.
Gunnar Wolf-Fontaine, he has 12 points this season. He's having a great season. He's 6th on the team in scoring. Sean Farrell has 20 points. You mentioned D. St. Paul with 19. Colangelo, 16. Brennan Brinson and Owen Power, a defenseman, both with 14 points. They have 5 guys over or at a point per game so far this season. So it's been a pretty electric start for Chicago. The only offense right now, and it's been a lot less consistent than Chicago, but the only offense it seems that might be able to match them in terms of how explosive they can be is Des Moines. Des Moines, when they get going, can put up numbers in spades, and we saw that on Saturday against Tri-City when they put up an 8 spot. The issue for Des Moines is with how young and inexperienced the team is, it seems like it only happens once every other couple weeks, but they've been the only other team that I've consistently seen put up 6+ goals this season. I know Cedar Rapids has had a good offensive start, but they've seemed like it's been a lot of 4 and 5 goal games, but Des Moines with another 8 spot. Joey Strada had 4 goals in that game, I believe. They're really dangerous if they can figure out how to get that more consistently, maybe not 8 goals and then 2 goals, maybe more like 4 and 5. And if the defense comes around, that offense could power them a long way.
Yeah, you talk about that. They won 8-4 on Saturday night, but on the weekend they allowed 9 goals. 2 games to Tri-City, and I don't think Tri-City is the most offensive team or the flashiest offensive team out there. So again, that is a big concern for Des Moines. They've scored 50, but they've allowed 49. Yep. So I mean, that's those numbers are both a little inflated on both sides, and I think the big key will be, especially when you get to that second half, it's so much harder to score because teams really clamp down defensively, get into more defensive systems, and it's tougher to do that. So it's going to be a challenge for the Buccaneers. Hopefully they can get their defense figured out and they can bring some of those numbers down. But you're not going to win too many games when you're a lot. Yeah, they gave up 4 goals on Saturday night, but they still won. Yeah, that usually doesn't happen.
And we'll look at the standings real quick before we take our break, just to give the listeners an idea of what's going on. Sioux Falls and Madison still at the bottom of their respective leagues. It's a log jam towards the top of both leagues, as you would expect this early in the season. Craziest thing right now is in the Eastern Conference. 5 points separates number 1 from number 6. Chicago's in first in the East, Waterloo in first in the West, and then in the West, the next of the top 5, Lincoln, Des Moines, Tri-City, Sioux City. In the East, Dubuque is second, Muskegon third, Cedar Rapids fourth, Youngstown fifth, but CR, Youngstown, and Green Bay, 4 through 6, all tied with 16 points. So very tight now in the USHL, and that's what we saw showcased this weekend again with Chicago, the only team sweeping a series, and CR the only other team with 2 wins. We'll take a break. When we come back, mention a couple teams that we'll be talking about more, the Tri-City Storm and the Lincoln Stars, the 2 opponents this weekend for the Fighting Saints, and also the first 2 college commitments of the USHL season for Dubuque, a team that doesn't have a ton of players that could even commit to college right now because of how many came into the season with those prior commitments, but 2 that we'll touch on the other side of this break. Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Milewski, Jim Leitner, and before we go into a brief preview of the upcoming weekend, 2 college commitments last week for the Fighting Saints. The first was pushed across my desk at about 4:05 on Wednesday, and then the next came across my desk about 4:09. I mean, they were rapid fire. Antonio Venuto commits to Ferris State, and Mark Cherametta commits to Ohio State. 2 good commitments, 2 good players so far this season for the Fighting Saints, and always good to get the ball rolling with those college commitments. As I mentioned before this break, probably not as many as we saw last year for the Fighting Saints, just because a lot more players came into this season with commitments. But definitely Cherametta, once you saw BU come off his name, you figured it was a short amount of time before he got another commitment. And Venuto has been one of the more pleasant surprises, I think, to start this season for the Fighting Saints. So good to see both of them get some college logos near their names on the line sheet now.
Yeah, I would agree with you on Antonio. I think he has been probably the biggest, most pleasant surprise. I didn't see him playing in all situations when we first saw him in training camp and trial camp. But he's worked his tail off and he's done a nice job. 6'2", 198. That's a big body. Mm-hmm. Plays really well on the penalty kill. He gets power play time, and you see him out there closing out games, 1-goal games late, and he's done a nice job there too. So good work for him. And in talking to him, one of the things that he mentioned is, when you have to work hard on this team, you have to work hard and practice every day. You have to earn your playing time. You have to, really, if you want to play on the weekends, you have to work your tail off during the week. And he's done that, and he's gotten opportunities on the weekend because of that, and it's made him a better player, and it's really opened the door for him to go to Ferris State, which is a good place for him to go. It's about an hour and a half from home in Michigan, so he's pretty excited about it, and excited to get that off his plate and focus on the rest of the season.
And Cherametta came into the season with commitment still attached to Boston University. That was dropped pretty early in the season. And now he's going to Ohio State. I mean, another really good program, maybe not with the same history as BU, but in the last 5 years, Ohio State has taken huge strides, and we've seen most recently Quinn Preston from the Fighting Saints go to Ohio State, have a lot of success there. I think it's a pretty big opportunity for Cherametta, someone that's shown a lot of skill early on in this season, and someone that we knew coming into the year would be a huge contributor to the Fighting Saints.
Yeah, Ohio State is one of those programs that I've really been impressed with over the last 5 or 10 years. I remember back in the earlier days, we had some guys from Dubuque commit to Ohio State, and they basically played in kind of a small rec rink where I think they only had seating on one side, and it was just a real bare bones operation at Ohio State. And now it's a Big Ten. It's a legit Big Ten conference facility. Great. And they've invested a lot of money into it, and it's a premier sport. Granted, it's not Ohio State football, it's not Ohio State men's basketball, but Ohio State has really made a commitment to all its sports across the board, and it really shows, and that's why they've seen a lot of success. They're going to Big Ten championship games in hockey. They're attracting high-end talent, both coaching-wise and player-wise, and it's a great program, a great landing spot for Mark to go to, and I think it's really cool for him. He was at BU last year and recognized that he needed to work on his game a little bit. Granted, the original plan was to go back to BU, but coming here to Dubuque, I think has really helped him and really helped him take his game to a next level. So, next year he can go into Ohio State and he can be an impact player right away. Whereas if he would have just maybe stayed at BU all 4 years, who knows? Would he have been an impact player as a sophomore or a junior? Maybe, maybe not. But this is an opportunity to take a step back, as an overage player here in Dubuque. You take your game to another level, and you open up a lot more doors for yourself at a great school like Ohio State. And I know he loves the business program there too, so it's going to be a really good fit for him.
Yeah, and not just the Fighting Saint alum on the playing side, but also J.B. Bittner is on the coaching staff after a couple years here in Dubuque as an associate head coach. So
he's a rising star too. He's a guy that Dubuque was really, really high on when he was here, and it didn't surprise me that he was only here a year before moving on to a prestigious program like Ohio State.
And Steve Rawlik has done a great job at the helm of Ohio State as well for the last, I believe, 6 years. This might be his 7th year now for the program. Quickly, let's touch on the weekend coming up for the Fighting Saints. One new team to the list in terms of teams that Dubuque has yet to play this season, and that's the Lincoln Stars. That game will happen on Saturday. It's Military Appreciation Weekend, but the first game, Tri-City, interesting. It's always interesting to see the second matchup of the season between teams, because the first one with so much uncertainty, the second one you can gain a lot from that first matchup, but it's not really it's not like the fifth or sixth matchup where there's so much familiarity yet. So there's enough to know maybe how Tri-City will attack Dubuque and vice versa, but there's also enough unknown where it could go completely a different way than any of us expect.
And two, you look at a Tri-City, this is the second meeting with them, but it's also the last. So how much do you invest in this weekend? Yeah, I mean, it's different if it's Tri-City and you're playing Sioux City 8 times a year.
Right.
You might invest a little bit more, in trying to scheme against the Sioux City Musketeers than you would Dubuque. But this is going to be a tough matchup, I think, for the Fighting Saints. They squeaked by out in Tri-City a few weeks ago, but that was the Storm's third game in 4 days, and Dubuque was fresh. So it's going to be a challenge for the Fighting Saints to face a team that's fresher and, has been a good defensive team. And I think it's going to be a good game.
And when we did the first Fighting Saints report of this month, it is actually the last Fighting Saints report, of October, we both talked about which weekend we thought might be the toughest on paper for the Fighting Saints. Obviously, last weekend might be the toughest with 2 losses now, but going into it, I thought this weekend would be the toughest because Tri-City, very defensive-focused team, and then you flip it to Saturday, and the Lincoln Stars come in as one of the highest-scoring teams in the USHL this season, and just the contrast of those styles in less than a 24-hour time difference is something that the Fighting Saints will have to be prepared to face, and it might be one of those games or one of those series where it actually benefits the Fighting Saints, who seem to overall be a pretty balanced team this year between defense and offense.
Yeah, and I think the number that Dubuque probably likes to see right now is Lincoln's allowed 47 goals. They've scored 43, which makes them one of the top scoring teams in the USHL, but allowing 47, that puts them kind of towards the bottom defensively too. So I expect that to be an up and down game with a lot of scoring chances, and I'd probably rather play that game the second of the two. It's probably easier to go from a defense-minded game to an offensive game the second night than the opposite way, because the first night's going to be a little more frustrating.
Yep.
The second night will be a little bit more freewheeling, if the numbers hold up. So I think that would probably be, if you had to pick who you're going to play on each night, I think this is probably the way the Fighting Saints would want it.
And the Fighting Saints, the positive of the 2 losses, I mean, you're still at home. You had a good amount of time to rest. The fatigue will be a little bit more for the teams traveling in, obviously. And Friday night, I think if they can get a good offensive performance Friday night, it could be a really good offensive weekend, because you mentioned, Tri-City is much more stingy than Lincoln. So if they can gain some confidence against the stingy Tri-City team, it would go a long way to Saturday, and they should already have confidence coming in against Tri-City, because granted they only scored 3 when they were in Kearney, Nebraska. They also hit 4 posts, so it could have been a lot more, and I think they certainly should have a little bit more confidence than Tri-City going into the matchup.
Yeah, and again, I go back to just this last weekend against Waterloo. Waterloo came in as one of the best defensive teams in the USHL, and Dubuque created a lot of chances. So I think that's something that I would build on. I would build on that positivity and show a lot of video clips of what they did extremely well against a good defensive team in Waterloo, and hopefully that translates into the game against Tri-City.
A good chance to make a statement in front of the home crowd for the last home games until the first weekend in December. So another lengthy layoff between home games. Fighting Saints want to leave the home crowd with a good taste in their mouth. And again, as I mentioned, here today on Veterans Day, we'll be celebrating the military both games this weekend, Friday and Saturday, Military Appreciation Weekend, sponsored by Hodge and Run for Troops. As you've seen on the Fighting Saints social media, the new jerseys have been released, and those will be auctioned off after Saturday's game to benefit the Veterans Freedom Center. And one final note on what will happen this weekend: all retired, active, and veteran members with a valid military ID will get free tickets to both games, and family members or friends of those members will get $3 off the tickets. So a great weekend, as always, for the Fighting Saints, and two great opponents. It should be another good hockey weekend for Dubuque. Speaking of hockey, we've fallen in love with grading or critiquing logos and jerseys in the last couple weeks, so we figured with the release of the Winter Classic jerseys for both Nashville and Dallas. Yeah, that's right. Dallas is in the Winter Classic.
Hosting
it in Texas, so that'll be fun at the historic Cotton Bowl. On the other side of the break, we're going to look at all of the Winter Classic jerseys over the years and give you our top 5. Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Milewski, Jim Leitner. Our final segment is dealing with Winter Classic jerseys, and the jerseys for both teams in the Winter Classic this year. The Dallas Stars hosting at the Cotton Bowl Stadium against the Nashville Predators. An intriguing Winter Classic matchup just because you certainly wouldn't think of winter hockey outdoors in Dallas. And it's just two teams that are really up and coming in the national spotlight with the sport. The Predators have been there a little bit longer than the Dallas Stars, but when the Stars got Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin and now Alex Radulov and Jim Montgomery at the helm, they've started to jump into the national spotlight as well. So a good way to showcase two teams that have never been in this event before and really don't get as much traction as teams that have been here multiple times, with the Bruins and the Flyers and the Blackhawks, Maple Leafs, and the Red Wings as well. But before we get into grading the past Winter Classic jerseys, there's already been an outdoor game this year, the Heritage Classic, the Jets and the Calgary Flames. Real quick, which of those jerseys did you like better?
Boy, that's a tough call. Those Canadian teams do it really well. I think I'm going to give a slight edge to Calgary.
See, I like the Jets. I like the color scheme. Calgary was a good touch on a jersey that they've done a lot of different times. The Jets was a different color scheme, a much darker blue, a much darker red than they usually had. I thought that was pretty cool. And I have to ask the same question, Dallas or Nashville for the Winter Classic jerseys?
I kind of like Dallas. I like Nashville's a little bit better.
See, I think I like Dallas better. I think the color scheme is cool. They have a lighter, more of a Kelly green almost, I think. And then the pants are a mustard brown type. But what I don't necessarily like about Nashville is they'd have Nashville and Predators. It might be a little bit too much lettering up there.
I like the script across the chest, though. Yeah. I do like that. It's a college feel, and I like that college. Some of those college sweaters are done really well when they have the nice script across.
Yeah, Michigan State, I think, had one that had Michigan and State a couple years ago. It was a good color scheme. If you haven't seen both of those jerseys, neither of them are bad jerseys by any means. Pretty good touches for teams that are getting their first crack at it. But we'll go into our list now. We'll start at 5, go all the way down to 1. And I know, obviously, people that are listening to this probably can't see these jerseys. If you don't remember these jerseys, just pull up your phone, pull up the computer. It's easy to follow along. We'll try to describe them a little bit, but obviously your eyes will do better justice than our words can. But some of them, I think, are memorable enough where they will stand on their own in your memories. So without further ado, I think we should kick it off with number 5, and we'll just give a brief reason why for each one.
Number 5, I'm going to go with the Toronto Maple Leafs, 2014, which I believe was at the Big House in Michigan. Mm-hmm. It's a blue sweater with the kind of the old-fashioned maple leaf on it that says Toronto Maple Leafs, with white, multiple white stripes down the sleeves. It's just one of those jerseys, and I'm a sucker for the old the old school ones, the teams that wore maybe in the 50s or the 60s. And you'll see that in my list. There's a lot of ones that are the exact recreation of what they used to wear. So I think once you get it right, you should never change. You should never go to a different jersey.
Yeah.
But I like this one. This one's probably from the 50s or so. Just a blue sweater with an old-fashioned stylized maple leaf on the chest and just a real sharp, traditional look.
All in all, that might have been the coolest Winter Classic, with 2 original 6 teams at the big house, with the snowstorm and Bozak winning it in a shootout. I think that was, all in all, spectacle-wise, maybe the coolest Winter Classic from all perspectives. My number 5 on the list is the New York Rangers from 2018. It was old school with a new school feel. They had a deeper navy with the Rangers and white lettering diagonal, but the coolest touch I thought was up on the top left. They had their crest that they've been using for a while now as in white with either the assistant or captain lettering in there, or just New York NY if they didn't have that. I thought just a clean look, the best of the Rangers outdoor uniforms for sure.
Would that have been when they played at Citi Field?
Yes.
Against
the
Buffalo
Sabres.
Was good. That was a good... All these Winter Classics have been good.
All these Winter Classics have been good. I thought Buffalo's uniforms were really cool that year as well, but the Rangers get the nod for me there. I think it's by far their best outdoor uniform. Again, that classic feel, but also with a little bit of the new age in there. So Rangers in 2018 is my number 5.
My number 4, I'm going to go back to 2009, the Winter Classic that was at Wrigley Field. And I'm not going to go with the Blackhawks. I'm going to go with the Detroit Red Wings. It's a white jersey with a big red stripe across it, an Old English D on the chest.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Fighting Saints jerseys this year, the 10th anniversary jerseys. Just, again, a real nice, sharp, classic look. And, you know, I like the old-fashioned D right across the chest, and just kind of reminds me of the roots of the sport going back to the early days, and I think that's what the Winter Classic is a lot about.
Yeah, that's a good jersey. That was, again, just fun Winter Classic. All the Winter Classics are good. I think just the outdoor hockey is always fun. That was another fun one. Wrigley, a tremendous venue. I'm going to go back to another game that included a lot of snow, and this, I believe, was the first ever Winter Classic in 2008. In Buffalo, Sidney Crosby in a shootout in a lot of snow. The Powder Blues, baby. The Powder Blues for Pittsburgh. Man, that was a nice way to kick off the Winter Classic jerseys. I love them in the NFL with the Chargers. I loved them in the NHL outdoors as well. Mostly because, outside of that, the Penguins crest in the center is fine. There's not a ton going on with that jersey otherwise. But it's a color that you don't see at all in hockey, and it was done really well. Just unique and a sweet color. And I'm not a huge fan of Penguins jerseys in general, but this was one that they absolutely nailed.
Yeah, you're spot on with the Powder Blues. My number 3, I'm going to go with the Powder Blues of the St. Louis Blues. 2017. And I believe this is a nod back to their inaugural year back in 1967. It's a light blue with a traditional blue note crest on it, but I just love it's a lighter shade of blue, powder blue, and it's kind of a lighter shade of yellow and white. So great piping. But again, I think this is a nod back to their early days in the 1960s. And again, I agree with you. Powder blues on ice are awesome. I don't know why more people don't do it.
Yeah.
Because it really pops, and that's number 3 for me.
The Winnipeg Jets alternates now are Powder Blues,
Those
I believe, and those are
very
sharp.
sharp.
I mean, you're 3 for 3 right there with Powder Blues, NHL.
Yeah.
We need more Powder Blues. I'm going to that 2014 game as well. I'm just picking the other team. I'm picking the Detroit Red Wings for my number 3. Again, just a really classic feel to that whole game. Detroit went with slightly darker red than they usually do, but the best, I think it had Detroit over the Red Wings crest, so it had both Detroit and the Red Wings crest. And all of the striping and the logos were cream colored, and it had such a cool vintage feel. I remember both goaltenders wearing brown pads in that game too. I mean, it was a huge vintage feel to that game, and I really like those. My favorite Red Wings Winter Classic jerseys, and they've been in at least 2, maybe even 3 now. But the Red Wings in 2014, I think, really got it right, and I think with the goaltenders might have looked the best in that game with those brown pads as well. But that was a lot of fun and a really good vintage feel to that jersey.
I'm going back to I agree with you on the 2008 Winter Classic, which was the inaugural one. Mm-hmm. At number 2, I go with the Buffalo Sabres, the jerseys they had. And again, this is the jersey that they wore when they first came in the NHL. It's exact replica of what they wore when they first came into the NHL in the early 70s. 2008, again, that was a great Winter Classic. That's really what got the ball rolling.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was the game where it was snowing, and I think it was Rich Stadium then, now in Buffalo. But it's the snow was falling. It was just, NHL couldn't have drawn it up any more perfect to steal away from college football on New Year's Day.
Yep.
They absolutely nailed it, and the jerseys from that game were I think one of my favorites all time in the NHL is those jerseys from that Winter Classic, because they were Buffaloes from the early days, and that's my number 2.
Yeah, and of course that game. I mean, the atmosphere alone, but then Wonder Boy Crosby scoring the shootout winner. I mean, everything about that just kicked it off perfectly for the NHL. Some of that you can't plan. Most of it you can't plan, really, with the weather and who scores that game winner. But they nailed it in everything leading up to it, and then they got really lucky with a lot of the stuff that made it even better. My number 2, I'm going to 2015, and I feel like these jerseys are lost in the shuffle because they're not a look that you've ever really seen before. But the Washington Capitals jerseys of 2015 have always stuck with me. Almost a burgundy type red. You have a big navy W in the center with the 3 stars over each point on the W, and then Capitals written right through that big W, and then the navy pants. A vintage feel. That was a good game. I think Eric Fair scored the winner there late, if I'm remembering correctly. I think he scored 2 goals in the first Winter Classic in 2011 for the Capitals, and I think he might have been the hero in that game as well. It was a late goal regardless. But those sweaters, I think, are lost in the shuffle for how clean they are. I like them a lot better than the other Winter Classic jerseys that the Capitals wore, which is what they've gone with the Capitals with the stick underneath and the stars.
The original jerseys.
Those are good, but these I think were a lot better, a lot more of a vintage feel, which is what I always look for in the Winter Classic. If you're not going to bring back an old jersey, make it look like something that would have been created 50, 60 years ago. I think the Capitals did a really good job with this one.
My number 1, you kind of stole my thunder a little earlier with I'm staying in 2008, again, the original, the first Winter Classic, but the Penguins, they're powder blues. If you probably sensing a little theme here with the powder blues, but those were really, really sharp. Powder blue with a dark navy blue and white stripes on them. I thought that was really sharp. And then you have the traditional Penguins logo in the center. Mm-hmm. It just really popped. And I do think that these do kind of remind me of the Jets' third jersey. Yeah. Real similar in that regard, but again, when you get that powder blue and you get it to, especially on ice, I just think it looks really sharp. And again, I'm a sucker for that first Winter Classic because that's the one that really got me hooked on that, and got me to watch that instead of college football on New Year's Day, New Year's Day was college football forever for me, and then that's really what changed it. Now it's hard for me to watch college football on New Year's Day because, well, I do, but I have to plan it around the Winter Classic first.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised none of the Blackhawks made it on the list for you.
You know, none of the Blackhawks made it on my list because my thing is the jerseys they have, their regular jerseys that they wear every day, are as good as it can get. Mm-hmm. How do you top that? I mean, that's my problem. How do you top, one of the best jerseys in hockey as it is? And I think some of the ones that they've had have been maybe a little bit too busy for my taste. And it's hard when you have that best jersey as it is to make it better.
Yeah, it is tough to top that Blackhawks jersey, but if they didn't top it, it came pretty close in 2009. I love the 2009 Blackhawks jerseys. Even before these jerseys, they're a nod to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, but even before these jerseys came out, I remember playing NHL on Xbox, and these were the jerseys that I would always pick from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I loved them. You've got the Blackhawks, the head in the middle, but with the circular crest with Chicago Blackhawks around there, and then you have a big tan line with red on the top and bottom. The numbers are clear and crisp with black with that cream colored outline. I'm a big sucker for the cream color to make it look like a throwback jersey in all these winter classics. I love these Blackhawks jerseys. Blackhawks against the Red Wings was a great way to follow up that first winter classic with Buffalo and Pittsburgh. And I thought they nailed these jerseys. They looked really good outdoors. They're my favorite for the Blackhawks in the winter. They're outdoor games as well, and they've been in quite a few. So I got to give the nod to the 2009 Blackhawks for number one.
The one thing about that is, and you're right about that, you see a lot of teams, it's about trends and everything. You see a lot of teams adapt a similar style to that one that you're mentioning, the 2009 Blackhawks Winter Classic. And that's like a style that you'd never seen in hockey before. And then all of a sudden you see junior teams having the similar pattern, or they'd have home and aways that are really patterned closely after that. So that's a mark of a really true exceptional jersey, is when people see that and, hey, let's incorporate our colors or our color scheme into that style or that pattern. So that is a classic one. For sure.
2009. Interesting that we had a lot of the same years. I think 2008 we covered both jerseys. 2014 we covered both jerseys, and 2009 we covered both jerseys for the teams as well. So very interesting, and I'm excited to see what the jerseys look like. They always look good when they release them, but they always look better when they're out on the ice on January 1st. So it'll be interesting to see what it looks like in the Cotton Bowl.
Did you see the San Diego Padres are going back to brown?
Yeah.
What is your take on that?
Brown's never a good color in jerseys.
I don't know. The brown and the brown and the gold, I kind of go. It's not as putrid as it was in the early 70s when it was all yellow and all brown. And I think if they're going to do brown and yellow, I think they got it right with the Padres this time. So.
My take on it is they might want to hope it's the 70s with black and white TVs with those brown uniforms. I don't know how they look in HD. But that's all the time we have for the Fighting Saints Report. I'm Jack Milewski for Jim Leitner signing off. We'll talk to you next weekend, and the Fighting Saints again. 2 big games this weekend, Military Appreciation Weekend, and their final 2 home games before the first weekend in December.